Two sweet alien girls fought over me and refused to share. So I made them both my wives. I want to go on the record and say that I was not, under any circumstances, trying to marry anyone when I landed on Fermi 7. In fact, if you'd asked me what I wanted that day, the answer would have been simple and incredibly unromantic. A Mark 12 multi-phase reactor coil, a replacement for the one that blew out on my ship 3 light-years back, preferably with the coolant reservoir still attached and not melted into a sad puddle of regret and aluminum alloy. That was it. That was the dream. Just me, my ship, a quiet re-entry back into the commercial lane, and maybe a greasy sandwich with questionable meat at the next fueling station. What I did not want was to become the focal point of an ancient interplanetary mating ritual involving two very determined, very attractive, and very incompatible alien queens. But here we are. And no, before you ask, I didn't misinterpret the situation. I didn't wander into a private ceremony and assume everyone was celebrating my arrival. There were literal banners, holographic fireworks, a red carpet. My name, spelled almost correctly, was projected into the clouds with a sky drone that buzzed like a dying mosquito and flickered every third syllable. At first, I thought I had landed in the wrong port, maybe mistaken for someone important, like a diplomat or a legendary warrior or even one of those traveling erotic poets with the tight leather pants and mysterious eyes. But then a group of ceremonial guards, all clad in iridescent armor that shimmered like oil on water, marched up to me, bowed low enough to eat dust, and declared that I was now officially a candidate for the great joining. The great what now? I asked. One of them, a particularly tall guard with a helmet shaped like a squid having an existential crisis, informed me that according to Faramisian lore, once every 1,000 moons, a foreign male of compatible biology would arrive to bridge the bloodlines of two rival houses through sacred matrimony. And wouldn't you know it, I apparently matched the genetic profile perfectly. They even had charts with glowing DNA helixes and percentage signs, and some highlighted keywords like fertility peak and bond stability threshold that made me deeply uncomfortable. I tried to tell them I was just here for parts, that I didn't want to bridge anything except the reactor coils in my engine room, but they just smiled and waved me toward a massive domed structure covered in silver vines and guarded by statues of what I think were either ancient goddesses or really confident dancers. Inside, everything smelled like cinnamon and anxiety. The floor pulsed with soft light. The air was thick with pheromonal mist that made my brain tingle in places I didn't know existed, and two women stood at the center of the room, facing each other like dueling suns ready to go supernova. One was tall, elegant, with pale skin that shimmered faintly in hair like liquid moonlight. She wore a gown that looked spun from frost and attitude, and her eyes were the color of glacial storms. The other was shorter, curvier, with deep bronze skin and fiery red curls that defied gravity and probably physics. She wore what I can only describe as battle lingerie, all strategic armor plating and exposed everything else, and had a grin that said she either wanted to kiss me or kill me, possibly both. They turned to me in unison, their gazes colliding with mine like tractor beams, and then with terrifying synchronization they both said, "Mine." I did what any rational man in my position would do. I laughed nervously, took a step back, and asked if this was one of those immersive theater experiences I'd heard about. The tall one, whose name I would later learn was Nyria, stepped forward and extended a hand like she expected me to kneel and kiss it. "I am Queen Nyria of the High House Larkai," she said in a voice that could have frozen magma. "You will stand by my side as consort and unify our peoples through calculated affection." I had so many questions. The curvy one, Kaylee, queen of the Emberklaw Pride, stepped in before I could embarrass myself further. "Ignore the ice witch," she said, rolling her eyes. "You'll be much happier in my palace, which is located above an active volcano and has an excellent view of the lava falls. Also, I cook." I blinked. "Are you two seriously arguing over who gets to marry me?" "No," Nyria said. "We are informing you of your destiny." "Yeah," Kaylee added with a smirk. "We're just skipping the boring courtship part and going straight to the fun." I looked around for hidden cameras, found none. Looked for exits, guarded, took a deep breath. "Okay, let me just clarify something," I said, raising my hands like a traffic cop with a migraine. "I'm not looking for a relationship. I'm not a diplomat. I'm not genetically optimized for anything except maybe sarcasm and mediocre repair jobs. I just need a coil, okay? That's it. A coil, metal, tubes, glows a bit." "We have coils," Nyria said, tilting her head. "Hundreds of them." "Thousands," Kaylee added, her eyes twinkling with wicked delight. "All yours if you pick me." "Or me," Nyria snapped. "Or," I said, voice rising, "neither of you." Silence, complete, suffocating, judgmental silence. Then simultaneously they both stepped closer. I took another step back and bumped into a fruit pedestal shaped like a suspiciously sensual dragon. "You're not from around here," Kaylee said, her smile widening. "So let me make it simple. This ritual is sacred. Your arrival was foretold. Denying it is considered deeply offensive." "Cataclysmic," Nyria added, "possibly war-provoking." "Great," I muttered. "So I either say yes and become a royal chew toy, or I say no and start a civil war." "You're a fast learner," Kaylee said approvingly. Then she looked at Nyria. "Too bad he likes me better." "He hasn't chosen," Nyria said coolly. "Yet." "Wait," I interrupted. "What happens if I pick both of you?" More silence, but this time it wasn't judgmental, it was intrigued. Nyria raised an eyebrow. Kaylee tilted her head. "You mean?" Simultaneously. "I mean," I said slowly, "if I'm the only compatible male in this equation, wouldn't it make more sense to unify both houses by me marrying both queens? Technically solves your rivalry, achieves the bloodline goal, and saves me from getting dismembered by choosing one over the other." Nyria looked at Kaylee. Kaylee looked at Nyria. Then they both looked at me like I just recited the secret verse of their ancient prophecy. "That might work," Nyria said reluctantly. "It's unconventional," Kaylee added, "but kind of hot." I sighed. "Okay then, is there a room I can sit in for 5 minutes and scream into a pillow before we continue?" "We have a soundproof chamber," Nyria offered. "With scented oils," Kaylee added helpfully. I closed my eyes. "Of course you do." And that, dear reader, is how I went from a parts-hunting loner to the future husband of 2 alien queens who may or may not kill each other during the honeymoon. And I hadn't even eaten breakfast yet. The thing about suggesting a diplomatic interspecies polyamorous tri-marriage as a desperate escape from an imminent death-by-jealousy situation is that people will take you seriously when they are desperate enough to want it to be real. Which, as it turned out, was exactly what happened after I, Callen Ryke, certified starship repair engineer and unlicensed relationship therapist, floated the ridiculous idea of marrying both alien queens instead of choosing between them. I thought it would buy me a few seconds of breathing room, maybe a diplomatic delay, maybe even a quick distraction while I faked a nosebleed and ran for the nearest supply shuttle. What I did not expect was that both Nyria and Kaylee would lean in slowly, eyes narrowed like they were analyzing rare data from a doomed black hole experiment, and then nod in eerie synchrony like I had just channeled the spirit of their shared great-grandmother. It was unsettling. Kaylee licked her lips thoughtfully, which I assumed was either a cultural display of interest or the Pharamisian equivalent of smelling weakness. Nyria, ever the queen of frosty logic and chilling composure, simply said, "Proposal acknowledged. Conditions to be negotiated." And then, as if my words were legally binding, the two royal guards flanking the entrance snapped to attention, barked a few words into their holographic bracelets, and within 30 seconds a floating data scroll the size of a kitchen table descended from the ceiling. It spun, glowed, beeped, and then settled in front of me with a satisfying mechanical purr. "What is that?" I asked, pointing at it like it might bite me. "Prenuptial contract," Nyria said, tapping the scroll with her index finger. "Standard terms, includes obligations, inheritance clauses, ceremonial boundaries, and acceptable methods of joint affection, and cuddling positions," Kaylee added, winking. I squinted at the document, which auto-translated into Galactic Common for my benefit. "Thank you very much," and was quickly overwhelmed by the sheer volume of bullet points. There were diagrams. There were legal definitions of snuggling. There were entire pages devoted to the precise order of who gets to hold which hand in public and on which planets. There was also a clause that apparently allowed for pillow duels as an acceptable means of minor conflict resolution, which felt weirdly specific until Kaylee casually mentioned that she once took down a rebellious senator with a feather-filled body slam. I tried to protest. I really did. I opened my mouth to explain that this had all been a joke, that I was under duress, that in human culture we do not generally resolve political conflicts through polyamorous engagement with highly aggressive space queens. But as I started to form words, Nyria raised one elegant eyebrow and said, "Would you prefer to be escorted to the plasma moat?" That shut me up, mostly because I didn't know if she was joking. At this point, my priorities had shifted. I was no longer looking for a reactor coil. I was now just trying to survive the next 24 hours without being declared enemy of the state, incinerated, or accidentally mated to a sentient cactus, which based on the murals I'd seen in the temple hallway was a non-zero risk. So I nodded, smiled politely, and allowed myself to be whisked away to the royal preparation chamber, which was a confusing blend of spa, armory, and bureaucratic nightmare. Inside, a team of alien attendants swarmed me with terrifying efficiency. One of them stripped my jumpsuit with surgical precision, another scanned my vitals while muttering about my vitamin deficiencies, and a third began smearing my chest with a glowing salve that smelled like hot chocolate and made my skin tingle. "This is fine," I told myself. "Everything's fine. Just smile, nod, maybe flirt a little, don't cry." I did all of that, maybe not in the correct order. The ceremony, as it turned out, was not being delayed. Oh no. Apparently, a dual queen engagement triggered an ancient prophecy timer that had been dormant for 600 years, and now that the clock had started ticking, it couldn't be stopped unless someone got married or exploded. So yes, I had just become the center of an interstellar countdown, and no one even asked me if I preferred cake or pie. The wedding was scheduled for the following morning, which gave me exactly 8 hours to figure out how to keep two powerful alien queens from tearing each other apart, while also not accidentally saying yes to any more clauses in the prenup that might require me to bear ceremonial tattoos in embarrassing places. That night, I was given quarters somewhere deep within the Royal Nexus Tower. It had a bed larger than my entire shuttle, sheets woven from something called whisper silk, and an AI named Myrtle who insisted on narrating my breathing patterns while adjusting the humidity to suit Kaylee's and Nyria's preferred atmospheric blends. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, wondering if I'd just ruined galactic diplomacy forever by being mildly attractive and too polite to say no. Around midnight, or what passed for midnight on a planet with 4 moons and no real concept of subtlety, I heard the door open. I sat up, heart racing, only to see Kaylee saunter in wearing what I can only describe as formal sleepwear made of confidence and a few square inches of sheer regret. "Just visiting," she said, holding up a bottle of something that glowed ominously pink. "Sleep juice, want some?" "Is that safe for humans?" I asked. "Probably," she said, already pouring it into 2 crystalline cups. "Maybe, not the point." I hesitated, then accepted the drink, mostly because I figured dying from alien alcohol would at least be more dignified than getting caught in a wedding duel. Kaylee plopped onto the bed beside me, stretched, and looked up at the ceiling. "You know, you're cute when you panic," she said. "Thanks," I muttered. "You're terrifying when you flirt." "That's the nicest thing anyone's ever said to me." She grinned. Then, just as I was about to say something potentially clever or at least not completely idiotic, the door opened again. Nyria stood in the doorway wearing a robe that screamed elegance and death in equal measure. "This is inappropriate," she said, gliding into the room like a very judgmental ghost. "Kaylee, we agreed to let him rest." "He's not resting," Kaylee replied. "He's bonding, big difference." I stood up. Okay, let's all just take a breath, maybe a few breaths. Let's maybe take those breaths in separate rooms." "I am not jealous," Nyria said. "I simply expect protocol to be respected." "And I simply expect him to be happy," Kaylee countered. "With me, naked." "You see what I'm dealing with," I said to Myrtle. Processing, the AI responded. "You are 93% doomed." "Thanks, Myrtle." Eventually, and I use the word generously, the 2 queens agreed to leave. Not because they were done arguing, but because a ceremonial officiant had arrived to conduct the first of several pre-wedding compatibility trials, which apparently involved me answering questions about my favorite planetary cuisines, preferred mating temperature, and whether I snored. By the time I crawled into bed again, emotionally exhausted and vaguely glowing from whatever was in that pink drink, I came to a horrifying realization. I had survived the first round. I was still alive, but I was no longer in control. And worse, I wasn't entirely sure I wanted to be. Because somewhere, deep under all the chaos, 2 very different women had looked at me and seen something they wanted to keep. And part of me, the part that had spent years drifting alone through the cold vacuum of the stars, wanted to be kept. Just not like this. Probably. Maybe. Definitely maybe. There is a very specific kind of regret that hits a man when he wakes up in a silk-draped alien bed, half covered in glitter, with one eye crusted shut from ceremonial bonding ointment and the other trying to focus on a royal schedule projected in neon above his pillow. That regret does not say, "I should have done things differently." No, that regret says, What the hell did I agree to, and how many laws did I accidentally help rewrite? I sat up, or at least attempted to, before immediately being pulled back down by something soft and determined wrapped around my leg. It turned out to be a ceremonial sash tied to my ankle, which apparently meant I was still technically within the bounds of the holy preparation phase, which meant I was not allowed to leave the bed until summoned by a ritual herald, which meant I had to lie there, blinking at the ceiling, trying to remember if I had actually accepted this fate, or if the drink Kaylee gave me last night was more than 93% questionable ingredients and 57% emotional manipulation. While I debated the ethics of reverse harem diplomacy, a trumpet blared. Not a subtle, royal sort of trumpet. No. This was a trumpet played by someone with unresolved trauma and a grudge against my eardrums. It came from the hallway, followed by the very enthusiastic stomp of boots that suggested someone had way too much energy for a man who hadn't had breakfast. A second later, the door opened, and a creature roughly the shape of a traffic cone with arms burst into the room and threw golden petals into the air like it was getting paid by the blossom. "Good morning, tri-spouse-elect," it chirped in 3 overlapping tones. "It is time for your official compatibility trials, as dictated by the Royal Compact of Mutual Domination and Shared Resources." "That is too many capital letters," I mumbled, sitting up again. "Can I have coffee first, or at least a granola bar?" "All sustenance must be earned through ritual performance," it replied cheerfully. "Trial 1 begins in 12 minutes. Wear something comfortable and preferably not flammable." It left without further explanation. I stared after it, briefly considered locking the door, then remembered this room didn't have locks because apparently queens and chosen consorts didn't need privacy. They needed symbolism and open floor plans. So I got up, put on the most practical thing I could find that did not sparkle, hum, or smell like fruit salad, and followed the glowing floor arrows to wherever trial 1 was waiting. Spoiler alert, it was worse than I expected. The first trial took place in a stadium. A real one, with seats and an audience and snacks. Thousands of alien spectators, each from different tribes, all cheering and waving signs that either supported Nyria, Kaylee, or in some cases me. Although the ones supporting me mostly just had drawings of me looking confused, which felt uncomfortably accurate. In the center of the arena stood 2 giant doors. One had Kaylee's sigil, which looked like a flaming sword hugging a heart. The other had Nyria's emblem, a snowflake wrapped in chains. Subtle, a loudspeaker crackled. "Tri-spouse-elect Callen Ryke," it boomed. "You will now be tested on your loyalty and emotional compatibility. Step forward and choose a door, only one. Behind it lies your first queen, behind the other disappointment." I froze. The crowd went silent. Somewhere in the distance, someone dropped a popcorn container with dramatic flair. "Okay," I said aloud. "So this is definitely a trap." The crowd murmured in agreement. "Let me guess," I continued. "If I pick one, the other gets offended. If I refuse, both are insulted. If I try to cheat, I get disqualified and possibly vaporized." More murmurs. One being near the front nodded solemnly. "Great," I muttered. "Really great. Just love it when my relationships come with explosive consequences." I closed my eyes and thought. Nyria would expect logic. Kaylee would expect passion. Choosing either would align with their styles but also confirm their competitive streaks. But if I wanted this 3-way disaster to work, I had to change the rules, not play by them. So I turned, walked to the center of the 2 doors, and sat down cross-legged. I'm not choosing, I said, projecting my voice as best I could. You want a trial, here it is. Make them both come out here. If I am to be married to both, then both should meet me in the middle, not hide behind separate doors like we're playing some cosmic dating game. The crowd gasped. The announcer stammered. The doors hissed. And then, to my surprise, both queens stepped out. Kaylee in full ceremonial armor that somehow still showed more skin than protection, and Nyria in a gown that looked like it had been designed by a thunderstorm. They met me in the middle. "Bold move," Nyria said, her tone unreadable. "Reckless," Kaylee added, clearly impressed. "Was that not the point?" I said. "I'm not going to build a life on a foundation of picking favorites. If this is going to work, I need you both in the same room at the same time, ready to do the hard thing." "And what hard thing is that?" Nyria asked. "Talk," I said. "Without weapons, without sabotage, without sexual bribery. Just talk." Kaylee pouted. "I was so close to using that silk harness too." "Later," I said, almost on instinct. They both blinked. The crowd blinked. I blinked at myself. I corrected, if that's culturally appropriate and emotionally consensual and not tied to a death duel. "Mostly not," Kaylee said. "Depends on how the knots are tied," Nyria added. The audience burst into laughter, which I hadn't realized was possible from 17 different throat configurations. A moment later, the trial was declared a success. Not because I had picked a door, but because I had made a new one. The herald, now wearing a crown made of fruit for reasons I didn't dare ask, declared my action the first unification step. We were then escorted to the Temple of Flesh and Promise, which sounded sexy, until I realized it was a bureaucratic office covered in roses where I had to fill out paperwork for 3 hours, confirming that I would not sue if either queen telepathically overloaded my nervous system during intimate bonding rituals. There was a whole paragraph on safe word protocols, translated into 12 languages and blinking in neon. We finished the forms. We signed with biometric stamps. We got a small certificate that said, "Congratulations, you are now emotionally entangled." I wanted a t-shirt. Instead, I got Kaylee throwing her arms around me in a celebratory hug that lifted me 3 inches off the ground, and Nyria placing a single kiss on my cheek like it was a territorial claim. I didn't fight either gesture, mostly because, deep down, in the part of me that had been floating alone in the stars for too long, it felt kind of right and terrifying, but mostly right. That night, we dined together in the Hall of Shared Desires, which I hoped was a metaphor and not a buffet with aphrodisiacs. It turned out to be both. Over glowing wine and vibrating fruit, the three of us talked, really talked. Nyria opened up about the pressure of perfection, the expectation to be a queen without flaw, a ruler without weakness. Kaylee admitted that behind all the heat and charm, she had never actually been loved for who she was, only what she looked like or what power she held. And I told them about the time my father left and my mother gave me a toolkit instead of comfort, how I learned to fix ships because I could not fix people, and how I never expected anyone to fight over me because I had never felt like I was worth fighting for. It got quiet. Not awkward quiet, honest quiet. And in that moment, sitting between a volcano of passion and a glacier of grace, I realized something profound. I had come here for a broken coil. I had found a broken galaxy, and somehow, against all odds, we might actually make each other whole. But first, we had to survive the next trial. Because the next one, according to the scroll glowing at the edge of the table, was called the test of touch. and I had no idea if that meant a dance, a duel, or something that involved massage oil and a waiver. Either way, I had a very bad feeling I was going to enjoy it far more than I should. Let me begin by stating something important for the historical record, or for the inevitable court hearing in some future galactic tribunal, where I will almost certainly be accused of misleading royalty, disrupting sacred traditions, or accidentally founding a new religion. I did not invent the test of touch. I did not ask for it. I did not request that it be scheduled before breakfast, nor did I ask for it to be officiated by a six-limbed therapist named Vraka, who smelled vaguely of nutmeg and radiated the kind of calm usually reserved for meditation instructors or high-level cult leaders. Yet there I was, half awake and emotionally undercooked, sitting on a vibrating floor pillow inside a dome constructed entirely of transparent organic crystal, staring at my two future wives while Vraka prepared a ceremonial mist designed to encourage emotional resonance and non-verbal vulnerability. I had never been more terrified in my life. The goal, Vraka said in a voice that sounded like someone gently massaging a waterfall, is to reach deep mutual understanding through calibrated physical contact, shared silence, and eye-gazing rituals. There will be no speech, no sarcasm, no technological distractions. I opened my mouth. Vraka raised one perfectly sculpted appendage. Except you, Callen Ryke. Your species' default setting is sarcasm. It is considered a cultural trait. You may use up to 15% sarcasm in the first phase. Please monitor yourself accordingly. I'm flattered to be culturally categorized, I said, which was probably already at least 20% sarcasm. But Vraka didn't tase me, so I assumed it passed. Nyria and Kaylee were sitting across from me, barefoot and dressed in ritual simplicity, which for Kaylee meant a single silk wrap that defied gravity, and for Nyria meant a flawlessly draped robe that looked like it had been designed by someone with a PhD in snowflakes. The moment the mist began to rise, everything got very quiet. Not awkward quiet, not suspenseful quiet. It was the kind of quiet that makes your brain start narrating its own panic in full detail, while your body freezes in fear of doing the wrong thing. Touch begins now, Vraka said, and the lights shifted from crystalline white to pulsing lavender. That's when Kaylee reached for my hand. Her skin was warm, calloused in the way a warrior's might be, but her fingers were gentle and almost hesitant, like she was holding something sacred and fragile and maybe a little slippery. Nyria followed a moment later, placing her hand over mine and Kaylee's, her touch precise and cool, like a snowflake deciding to land for once instead of melt or shatter. We sat like that, fingers intertwined, breathing slowly, and I realized something that made my stomach flip inside out. Neither of them was faking it. For all the ceremony and competition, for all the quips and veiled insults and outright attempts at seduction, they were genuinely here, genuinely feeling something, and I was the epicenter of it. That was both flattering and horrifying, because I knew, deep in the weirdly glowing mist of this dome, that if I broke this now, if I treated it like a joke or a game or a clever escape from loneliness, I would not just ruin the trial, I would break them. Kaylee looked into my eyes first. No words. Just this burning need to be seen without the armor, without the expectations. Her eyes were volcanic, not just in color but in depth, swirling with layers of desire and fury and hurt. I nodded almost imperceptibly and gave her fingers a squeeze. Then Nyria turned to me. Her eyes were still but not cold. They shimmered with restraint, with centuries of conditioning, with the weight of a throne carried too early and too alone. I nodded to her too, not to mirror what I had done for Kaylee, but because it was true. I saw her. I saw both of them. The mist thickened. The lights dimmed. Vraka said, "Phase 2 begins. Initiate mutual alignment." Which, as it turned out, meant lying down, together, on the same cushion, with our heads aligned and our bodies in contact from shoulder to ankle. I will spare you the specifics of how we arranged ourselves, mostly because there were elbows involved, and at one point Kaylee nearly kneed me in the spleen, but once we settled, something strange happened. The panic faded. The awkwardness evaporated. The contact stopped being sexual or political or strategic and became something else entirely. It became real. For a moment, I forgot that I was Callen Ryke, accidental consort, sarcastic mechanic, unwilling participant in a cosmic dating show. I was just a person holding two others, and in that tangle of limbs and breath, I felt more grounded than I had in years. Vraka began to hum. It was a low, resonant tone that vibrated through the floor and into our bones, aligning heartbeats or chakras, or maybe just reminding us that time still existed. We lay there for what felt like both 10 seconds and 3 hours. When it was over, the lights slowly brightened, the mist receded, and Vraka clapped her hands together in what I assume was the intergalactic sign for "You survived emotional intimacy without combusting. Well done. You have passed," she said. "Your touch compatibility score is 92. That is above average for triads involving mixed species. There is hope for you yet." Kaylee sat up first, tousled and smiling, her face relaxed in a way I had never seen before. Nyria followed, her expression unreadable but softer around the edges. I stayed lying down a moment longer, staring at the ceiling, trying to figure out when exactly I had started falling for both of them. Because I had. There was no denying it now, not after that. And as ridiculous as it sounded, I realized that I no longer wanted to escape. I wanted this to work, not for diplomacy, not for survival, for me, for us. Of course, that moment of clarity was immediately ruined by the sound of klaxons blaring outside the dome. Vraka blinked, turned toward the nearest data panel, and let out a melodic sigh that somehow still conveyed annoyance. "There has been a breach," she said. "Uninvited party attempting to disrupt the bonding process. Hostile intent detected. Security compromised." "What kind of hostile?" I asked, sitting up too fast and immediately regretting it as a cramp shot through my leg. "Violent ex-lover, political saboteur, giant carnivorous worm." "Worse," Vraka replied. "Mother." "Whose mother?" Kaylee and Nyria asked at the same time. Vraka paused. "Yours." They both looked at each other, then at me, then back at each other. "Oh no," Kaylee said, "not her." "This is a disaster," Nyria added. "Should I run?" I asked. "No," Nyria said, "she will smell fear." "Hide," Kaylee said. "Just hide, somewhere soft, somewhere with blankets, preferably underground." "I am right here," said a new voice, sharp and echoing from the hallway. "And if any of you are hiding under ceremonial cushions again, I swear by the stars I will light this dome on fire." A tall, terrifying woman in imperial red robes entered like a meteor crash landing into a tea party. Her eyes scanned the room. She looked like someone who had invented several types of war, won all of them, and then judged the losers for not dying more gracefully. "So," she said, "this is the human." "Technically, yes," I said, "though I prefer reluctant participant or confused romantic entanglement." "He is better in person," she said to her daughters. More spine than I expected, still stupid but charmingly so. Mother, Nyria said through clenched teeth, we are in the middle of an official bonding trial. I can see that, she replied. You are both glowing, and she pointed at me. Try not to ruin the galaxy with your earthling nonsense. We already have enough emotionally damaged monarchs. Noted, I said. Now if you'll excuse me, I am going to scream into a cushion for exactly 47 seconds before the next trial, she said, turning and walking out with the same energy she had entered, leaving a trail of awe and moderate fear behind her. When she was gone, Kaylee let out a slow breath. Well, she said, that could have been worse. She could have vaporized me, I said. She could still, Nyria said, but I doubt it. She likes you in her own terrifying way. That's comforting, I said. Is it? Kaylee asked. Not really, I replied, but I'll take what I can get. We looked at each other. Three people caught in something too big, too strange, and too real to back out of now. And I knew, as surely as I knew my reactor coil was still broken and I had no way off this planet, that the next trial would not be easier. But maybe, just maybe, it would bring us closer. Assuming we survived it, and assuming her mother didn't decide, I looked better as a decorative ash pile. It turns out that after a bonding ritual involving skin-to-skin contact, synchronized breathing, and some light telepathic vulnerability, there is no dignified way to transition into your next scheduled appointment, especially when that appointment is titled Trial of Political Compatibility and comes with a subheading that reads mandatory participation required to avoid war. I know this because exactly 14 minutes after I had successfully navigated the emotional obstacle course known as being smooshed between two alien queens while trying not to have a full-blown identity crisis, I was escorted into a chamber that looked like someone had tried to crossbreed a United Nations summit with a professional wrestling arena and accidentally succeeded. The chamber had tiers. It had lights. It had flags, translators, banners, a suspiciously shiny floor, and a central platform large enough to stage either a public marriage proposal or a dance battle. There were balconies carved into the walls, each one filled with spectators from various planetary factions who all had some stake in this tri-union nonsense, and every one of them was holding a data tablet, a ceremonial fan, or a small animal that might have been symbolic or might have been lunch. Kaylee was already there, lounging like a sunbeam on her assigned cushion, wearing an outfit that could only be described as aggressively diplomatic and almost entirely unzipped. Nyria stood nearby, dressed like a goddess on trial, her gown made of folded light and extremely expensive judgment. They looked at me as I entered, and while their expressions said we trust you, their eyes also said please do not ruin everything with your mouth. I stepped onto the platform and was immediately greeted by the trial mediator, a spherical creature with 8 optical stalks, a voice like boiling tea, and a ceremonial staff taller than me and 3 times as sparkly. Callen Ryke, it said, rotating slowly as if trying to find my most photogenic angle. You have reached the midpoint of your bonding process. This trial will determine whether you possess the political acumen to serve as a neutral consort to 2 rival queens whose union is unprecedented and whose supporters are statistically prone to stabbing. That's a fair summary, I said. Do I get flashcards? No, the mediator replied. You will be asked 3 questions, one from each faction. Your answers will be judged not by correctness but by survivability. Answer wisely or creatively. Or both. No pressure then, I muttered, adjusting my tunic and trying not to visibly sweat through centuries of diplomatic expectation. The first question came from a representative of the Ryke faction, a tall, skeletal woman with silver eyes and a speaking voice like cold silk dragged across a battlefield. "Human," she said, which was already not a great start. If your two wives issued contradictory commands during a time of interplanetary crisis, who would you obey and why? I blinked. That was the opening question. That was the easy round. Great. First, I said, I would find out which one had coffee. Then I would explain that contradictory commands in a crisis usually mean neither party has full information. I would request a unified strategy meeting, propose a compromise based on shared interests, and if that failed, I would fake an engine fire so everyone had to evacuate to the emergency bunker until they calmed down. Silence. Then polite applause. Kaylee grinned. Nyria nodded slightly. The Ryke woman tilted her head like a raptor evaluating prey and said, "Acceptable." The second question came from the Emberklaw faction, represented by a heavily tattooed warrior with tusks, 4 earrings in one nostril, and a ceremonial hammer resting across his lap like he was waiting for me to say something stupid just so he could legally use it. "Earthman," he growled, "our Queen Kaylee values strength, loyalty, and passion. What will you offer her in moments when your species' cowardice tells you to run?" "That depends," I said. "Are we running from an emotional conversation or a space monster with teeth the size of escape pods?" The warrior's nostrils flared. I continued, "Because if it's the first, I will stay even if it kills me. If it's the second, I will grab her hand, shout a clever one-liner, and run like a hero in slow motion while explosions go off behind us. Either way, I will not leave her alone." He stared at me. Then slowly he nodded. "He is foolish, but in a way that might survive." "That's the nicest thing anyone said to me all day," I replied. The final question came from the neutral observers, the United Council of Non-Aligned Species, whose representative was a small floating jellyfish wearing glasses and a bow tie. "Mr. Ryke," it said, bobbing gently, "if a third queen from a rival species offered herself to you in secret in order to sabotage this union, what would you do?" "Easy," I said. "I would tell Kaylee and Nyria immediately, let them decide the punishment together, and then document the entire encounter for the inevitable historical drama series that someone's going to make out of this mess." The jellyfish blinked. "You are disturbingly aware of how history works." "I read a lot," I said. A chime sounded. The trial mediator spun once and declared, "The consort candidate has survived the political compatibility trial with no fatal responses, minimal offense, and an above-average sense of timing. He is cleared for continuation." Applause erupted. There was cheering. Somewhere in the balconies, someone launched a confetti cannon. Kaylee threw her arms around me in what was definitely not a platonic hug, and Nyria placed a ceremonial sash over my shoulders with the precise grace of someone who would not admit to being impressed but definitely was. I should have been relieved. Instead, I felt a sinking sensation in my gut, the kind that comes right before you remember the thing you forgot, like leaving the oven on or ignoring the evil space sorcerer in the prologue. I turned to Nyria. "There's another trial today, isn't there?" "Yes," she said, "and it's the worst one. Worse than emotional exposure and political landmines." "Much worse," Kaylee said. "It's dinner with our families." I nearly fainted. Dinner with one alien royal family is already a logistical nightmare. Doing it with two at once, in the same room, while trying to maintain a delicate balance between affection, honesty, and not getting impaled on a ceremonial fork, is the social equivalent of juggling knives on a unicycle during an earthquake. The dining hall was massive, round, and lit by bioluminescent chandeliers that pulsed gently with the mood of the room, which was currently best described as hovering between polite aggression and full-scale cultural war. On one side sat Nyria's family, all dressed in various shades of ice and judgment. On the other sat Kaylee's clan, who looked like they had just returned from a festival involving fire, wrestling, and recreational explosions. In the middle sat me, sweating gently into my napkin. "Do not compliment anyone's eyebrows," Nyria whispered. "It implies seduction." "Do not insult the spicy sauce," Kaylee warned. "It's made by my grandmother. She has a tail and a temper." "Got it," I said. "No eyebrows. Love the sauce. Try not to die." The meal began. There was soup. There was awkward silence. There were questions about Earth, my education, my mating rituals, and whether or not I could survive Kaylee's family sauna. There was a brief debate over whether my presence violated a 300-year-old pact about non-native consorts, but it was tabled when I passed the diplomatic rice correctly, using both hands and appropriate bowing angles. Halfway through the meal, Kaylee's grandmother challenged Nyria's uncle to an arm wrestling match. It ended with a shattered table, 3 bets paid in gemstones, and an unscheduled moment of bonding between the two clans. It was somehow a success. And as dessert was served a floating custard that may or may not have been sentient, I leaned back and realized something I hadn't dared to before. I wanted this. Not just the survival, not just the adventure. I wanted these people, these women, this chaos. I wanted it all. And then, just as I was beginning to relax, the mediator reappeared in the doorway holding a glowing scroll. "Apologies for the interruption," it said, "but the trial of physical endurance has been advanced. Please report to the arena immediately." "Of course it has," I said, standing up and looking at my 2 fiancées. "How bad is it?" "You'll be fine," Kaylee said. "Probably," Nyria added. "Probably. Let's just say you might want to stretch first," Kaylee said. "A lot." "And drink water," Nyria added. "You'll be sweating." "Great," I muttered. Nothing says love like surviving an obstacle course designed by lunatics. And with that, I walked into whatever insanity was waiting, praying that it involved fewer explosions than dinner, but not really believing it would. If I had known that the trial of physical endurance would begin with me getting punched in the ribs by a ceremonial combat dummy with 6 arms and a grudge against humanity, I might have requested more stretching and fewer croissants at breakfast. Unfortunately, I had learned by now that asking for anything on this planet, especially things like mercy or a water break, usually just got me a confused look followed by more pain. The arena was not an arena in the traditional sense. It was a sprawling, multi-level death gymnasium carved into the heart of a volcanic ridge, featuring everything from zero-gravity sprint tunnels to walls that pulsed with electricity and judgment. Kaylee and Nyria stood on the observation deck, looking equal parts impressed and deeply entertained. Kaylee wore a sports bra made of dragon leather and combat boots with knives in the heels. Nyria wore a silver tactical robe that somehow never wrinkled, even when she leaned forward to shout helpful advice like use your knees or try not to pass out. A floating drone spun around me, blinking red. then announced in a voice far too cheerful for the occasion that my trial would involve 4 sections: agility, strength, balance, and stamina. It also politely reminded me to sign the injury waiver, which I did by pricking my finger on a ceremonial quill and bleeding on a glowing stone. This was all normal apparently. The first section, agility, involved dodging high-speed plasma disks while leaping across spinning columns suspended over a bottomless chasm. Easy, if you had wings, or a death wish. I did not have either, so I improvised by screaming internally, flailing strategically, and discovering that my survival instincts had been vastly underused until now. I cleared the section in 12 minutes, 7 bruises, and one very close call that singed the tip of my ear and gave Kaylee a minor panic attack. The second section was worse. It was strength-based. It required lifting a stone pillar, carrying it through a shifting maze, and placing it atop a mechanical altar guarded by sentient vines that judged your posture. The pillar was heavier than my ship. The maze changed directions based on my emotional stability, and the vines hissed every time I grunted too loudly. I finished that one by accidentally collapsing the wall with a frustrated shoulder charge, and then convincing the vines I was emotionally invested in proper lifting form. They seemed pleased. Section 3 was a narrow beam suspended over molten rock that required me to cross it while balancing 3 ceremonial orbs on my head, chest, and hip. These orbs buzzed with minor shock energy and insulted me in several dialects if I moved too quickly. Halfway through, one of them shouted something about my posture being a disgrace to romantic alliances, and I may have shouted back. The beam shook. The crowd roared. I somehow made it across without falling or crying, which brought me to the final section. Stamina. The worst of them all. This one was a straight-up endurance gauntlet, involving treadmills that adjusted incline based on your heartbeat, monkey bars coated in an alien oil that doubled as aphrodisiac and lubricant, and a final sprint that included carrying a ceremonial queen mannequin weighing approximately as much as 2 full-grown ostriches. By the time I crossed the finish line, I was slick with sweat, dignity, and at least one emotion I did not have a name for. The crowd erupted. Kaylee leapt over the balcony and tackled me with a hug that nearly dislocated my spine. Nyria walked calmly to my side, offered me a towel made of compressed fog, and said I looked acceptable, which was the closest she had ever come to complimenting anyone's physical performance. A glowing panel beside the arena lit up with my scores: agility 91, strength 84, balance 88, stamina 95, and overall marriage potential labeled as dangerously high. There were cheers, flowers, and an alien trumpet solo that made me question the existence of music altogether. But what really mattered was the look on Kaylee's face when she said I did not just survive that trial, I owned it. And the way Nyria silently took my hand, fingers cold but steady, and whispered that I might be worthy after all. Later that evening, I was escorted to what they called the Room of Recovery, which sounded peaceful but was in fact a private chamber where both queens had decided I needed to experience intimate diplomacy. Kaylee arrived first, dressed in what I can only assume was the infamous silk harness she had mentioned days ago. It shimmered in the low light, shifted like liquid temptation, and did absolutely nothing to cover her expression, which was 100% determined mischief. Nyria entered moments later, wearing a gown so elegantly translucent that I immediately questioned every assumption I had about formality, modesty, and how cold fabric could possibly be. They did not speak at first. Neither did I, mostly because my brain was buffering. Kaylee closed the door. Nyria dimmed the lights. A scented vapor filled the air, something sweet and sharp that made my pulse accelerate and my vocabulary reduce to pre-language levels. "This is not a physical trial," Nyria said, voice soft. "This is personal. Private," Kaylee added, moving closer. "Important." I had a lot of questions, mostly about etiquette and safety, and what exactly the legal implications were for someone in my position who was definitely outnumbered, deeply flattered, and no longer confident in his ability to stand without leaning on something. "You have the right to pause," Nyria said, "to breathe, to leave." "But we hope you won't," Kaylee whispered, her fingers brushing mine. "The thing about consent, real consent, is that it matters most when everything else feels overwhelming." They gave me space even when they closed the distance. They offered, they waited, they respected. And so I stayed. We talked first, about fears, about what love meant, about the things they had lost. Kaylee told me about the first battle she won, how she had stood over the body of her enemy and realized it was her cousin. Nyria admitted that she had never kissed anyone without wondering if they were doing it to gain her favor. I told them about my ex, who had once called me a human repair manual with a nice face and left me for a robot who could speak 14 languages and write poetry. Then we laughed. A lot. Nervously. Awkwardly. Honestly. What followed was not frantic or dramatic or even particularly coordinated. It was two women and a man learning to share a moment they had never prepared for. There were limbs. There was laughter. There was at least one accidental knee to the chin. There were whispered compliments, slow touches, cautious explorations of what it meant to trust someone with more than your body. And afterward, there was silence. The good kind. The kind where you feel full without needing to speak. I fell asleep between them, warm, tangled, and more at peace than I had been in years. And I dreamed of nothing. Which, for a man who had spent his life overthinking every possible future, was the most romantic thing of all. The next morning I woke up to find both queens gone, the bed empty, and a scroll on my chest that read, "We did not want to wake you. Enjoy breakfast, and please do not speak to the ambassador from Heliox until we return." Naturally, the first thing I did was speak to the ambassador from Heliox. In my defense, he showed up while I was still halfway through a platter of blue pastries and something that looked like bacon but screamed when I picked it up. The ambassador was 8 feet tall, wore a suit made of live insects, and communicated entirely through song. His first message was a low hum that translated to "Congratulations on your impending matrimony. May your union be fertile and your digestion untroubled." His second message was less pleasant. He warned me that a coalition of political rivals had begun conspiring to block my marriage by invoking an ancient planetary clause that forbade any union that could destabilize the power balance between major houses. I asked if this was serious. He sang yes. I asked if there was a legal workaround. He sang possibly, but only if I could prove that my influence was neutral and my intentions entirely non-colonial. I assured him that the only thing I was trying to colonize was emotional stability. He blinked his 3 left eyes and said that was the most human thing he had ever heard. We parted amicably. I made a note to tell Kaylee and Nyria as soon as they returned. But even as I sat there, trying to digest everything I had learned, I felt the winds shifting. This was no longer just about romance or biology or proving myself in front of curious crowds. This was about politics, power, history. And somewhere out there, someone had decided that me marrying two queens might just be the spark that lit a galactic fuse, which meant I had two choices: walk away now and save myself a lifetime of chaos, or stay, fight, and maybe change everything. I looked at the empty bed. I remembered their voices, their hands, their trust, and I knew I was staying even if it killed me. There is a distinct difference between being admired and being owned, and I was beginning to realize that somewhere along the whirlwind of trials, rituals, and near-fatal obstacle courses, that line had started to blur in the most inconvenient ways. At first, it was easy to laugh off. Every time I entered a room, I was announced with a fanfare that grew longer each day. My title had ballooned from prospective consort to blessed anchor of twin thrones, radiant bridge between bloodlines, and spark of desirable chaos. Children waved miniature plushies of me. Vendors sold tea infused with simulated human pheromones. Someone even published a romance novella starring a heavily fictionalized version of me named Callen the Ravishing. None of that was the problem. The problem was that in every meeting, every ceremony, every sweet but increasingly strained breakfast conversation, I started to feel like an artifact more than a participant. Nyria's aides began scheduling my public appearances without asking me. Kaylee's guard insisted I begin weapon training, not for defense, but because shirtless dueling in ceremonial oil had spiked public approval ratings. At a press conference, I was asked what brand of robe I slept in. At dinner, the dessert came molded in the shape of my face. I tried to laugh. I tried to make it fun. But inside, a quiet irritation was beginning to sprout. It grew roots when I noticed Nyria brushing off my attempts to ask about policy matters, gently but firmly reminding me that my role was emotional, not administrative. It bloomed when Kaylee winked at the crowd during a parade and joked that her human was housebroken now. It reached the surface when I caught a glimpse of a strategic report from the Council of Stability that labeled me as a successful morale asset and recommended leveraging my body language in more political broadcasts. I was not angry, not yet, but I was no longer comfortable. So when I found myself at the edge of the royal gardens, away from the noise, standing barefoot in the grass and wondering if I had somehow wandered into a gilded cage with silk curtains and passionate kisses but no locks, I knew I needed to talk, really talk, not the flirty banter, not the soft-spoken reassurance, a real conversation. One that might ruin everything or save something deeper. I found them by the reflecting pool, seated side by side beneath a canopy of woven silver leaves that shimmered with the ambient glow of planetary light. They looked peaceful at first glance, like two sovereigns discussing the alignment of stars or the fate of nations, but as I stepped closer, I saw the tension in Kaylee's fingers and the stillness in Nyria's eyes. They were talking about me. I knew it before a word was spoken. I cleared my throat. Both their heads turned. Kaylee smiled automatically. Nyria straightened her posture. I had never felt more like a prop in my own life. "Can we talk?" I asked. "Just us, not the queens and the consort. Just the three of us, people together." Kaylee nodded, curiosity flickering behind her eyes. Nyria hesitated, then gestured to the cushioned bench beside them. I sat. For a moment, none of us said anything. I looked at the pool, at the small ripples dancing across the surface. at the distorted reflection of a man who looked tired and unsure. "I need to ask something," I said, "and I need you to let me finish it before you speak. Please." They both nodded. I took a breath. "Do you love me, or do you love the idea of me?" Silence, not angry silence, not defensive silence. Just the kind of stillness that happens when reality finally steps into the room uninvited. "Because I can't be a symbol," I said. "I can't be your tool for uniting factions or impressing dignitaries. I can't be the face you parade when you need to rally morale. I'm not angry about the rituals or the trials or the weird stuff we've all done to prove this works. I said yes because I wanted to. I stayed because I chose to, but I am not a banner. I am not a campaign. I am a person. And lately, I feel more like an asset than a partner." Kaylee looked down. Her fingers curled into the hem of her tunic. Nyria's expression did not change, but her jaw clenched so subtly I would have missed it if I had not spent the last 2 weeks memorizing her every micro-emotion. "You're right," Nyria said softly. "We have used you more than we meant to." "I didn't mean to," Kaylee added. "I just got excited. You made it feel easy, like we could fix everything. And maybe we still can," I said. "But not like this. I need space, not to run, just to breathe. To remember who I am when I'm not wearing 10 titles and being kissed in front of 1,000 cheering strangers." "Where will you go?" Nyria asked. "Nowhere far," I said. "Just the hangar. I have tools there, engines to tinker with, old habits." Kaylee looked up. Her eyes shimmered with something I could not name, regret maybe, or fear. "We want this to work," she said. "We want you." "Then let me come back to you by choice," I said, "not by schedule." They nodded, not with joy, not with ease, but with understanding, which was more than I had dared hope for. I stood, walked back toward the palace, and did not look behind me until I reached the gate. When I did, they were still there, watching, waiting, not holding me, not calling me, just letting me go, which meant maybe, just maybe, I would return. The hangar was dark, dusty, and smelled faintly of engine coolant and independence. I liked it immediately. I found a workbench, pulled on my old gloves, and began disassembling a pulse regulator that had not functioned since I first arrived. It was familiar work, dirty, repetitive, honest. There were no titles in this room, no cameras, no scripts, just gears and wires and the occasional satisfying clink of something clicking into place. I worked for hours, maybe more, time blurred. At some point I found music on an old compad, earth music. Jazz, I think. Something with a saxophone that sounded like it was arguing with the stars. I smiled. Not because anything was perfect, but because something was real. That was enough. When I looked up, the lights had dimmed. A tray sat nearby, food left quietly. My favorite fruit and the bread Kaylee once smeared on my face during breakfast because I insulted her knife skills. A small note sat beside it. "We see you. Come back when you are ready." No signature. None needed. I ate. I sat. I stared at the ceiling. I thought about how easy it is to fall into someone's arms and how much harder it is to stay when everything feels too heavy. But they had listened. That mattered, more than jewels, more than applause. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the tiny hologram projector Kaylee had modified so it would show all 3 of us dancing at that ridiculous festival 2 nights ago. We looked happy. We were happy. I wanted that back, and I would get it, but not by becoming a symbol, by being myself, fully, loudly, honestly, even if it meant breaking things to fix them. I cleaned my hands, put away my tools, and walked to the door. I did not go back just yet, but I left it open. That was enough for now. There is a kind of quiet that happens when people are about to do something uncomfortable but necessary. not the quiet of fear or avoidance. This is the stillness of people preparing themselves to peel back a layer they normally keep covered in armor, silk, or sarcasm. That was the quiet that filled the room when Kaylee and Nyria sat together in the Tower of Resonance, a chamber reserved for high council gatherings, but currently emptied of aides, guards, and courtiers. It was just them, facing each other across a low table with 2 cups of citrus tea that neither of them had touched. Kaylee looked down at her fingers, absently tracing the curve of the cup, her mind far from the usual war games and tactical flirtation she wielded like weapons. Nyria sat straight, her posture composed but not rigid, her eyes unusually bare of the ceremonial glow she typically activated during any kind of public discussion. This was not a performance. This was not diplomacy. This was something they should have done weeks ago. "You hurt him," Kaylee said quietly, not as an accusation, as a fact. "I did," Nyria replied. "We both did." Kaylee looked up. "I thought I was giving him attention, support, enthusiasm." "You were," Nyria said, "but you did not ask what he needed. You gave what you wanted to give. I did the same. We painted him in our colors and forgot to ask what his looked like." Kaylee sighed. "You are much more poetic when you feel guilty." "Do not make me regret this," Nyria said. "Too late," Kaylee replied, but her tone was soft. "I wanted to be the one who made him laugh. I wanted him to look at me like I was the answer, so I made him into a question, and when he pushed back, I almost didn't listen." "You did better than I did," Nyria admitted. "I calculated his presence like a piece in the game, a valuable piece, but still a piece. I let the council weigh him like cargo. I allowed the court to frame him as an asset, not a man. I kept thinking it was enough that I desired him, that he should be grateful, that I should not have to say more." Kaylee blinked. "You're saying it now." "Because he made me," Nyria said. "Because he stopped pretending everything was fine, because he trusted us enough to walk away." Kaylee leaned back. "He is not like us. That is what makes him special. That is what makes him dangerous." Nyria nodded. "We are queens who have never shared power. We are used to control. We were never taught to let ourselves be wrong. We were never taught to apologize," Kaylee said. "So let us teach each other now," Nyria replied. They stood together, not side by side, facing forward, toward the corridor that would take them to the hangar, toward the man who had changed everything not by conquering but by refusing to be conquered. Callen was waist-deep in an open engine core when they arrived. He had not expected them that day. Not yet. Not until later when he had decided whether he was ready, but there they were. Kaylee in a flight jacket covered in grease she had probably borrowed just to look like she belonged in a mechanic's world. Nyria in a simple gray tunic with a single braid tucked behind her ear. No guards, no titles, no fanfare, just 2 women with exhausted eyes and tentative hope. He looked up, wiping his hands on a rag that had once been white and now looked like it had fought a small oil-based war and lost. "Hey," he said. "Hey," Kaylee replied. "Nice ship." "She's temperamental," Callen said, "like someone I know." "Only one of us?" Kaylee asked. "Let's not get competitive," Callen said. "I'm not emotionally fireproof yet." Nyria stepped closer. "We came to talk, not to fix it, just to talk." "I like that plan," Callen said, setting down his tools. "Please say things." Kaylee took a deep breath. "You were right about everything. We didn't see it happening, but we did it. We turned you into a symbol and forgot you were a person. You didn't deserve that." "You deserve to be a partner," Nyria added. "Not an accessory, not a unifying metaphor, just a man who we care for, who we want, not because you hold us together, but because we want to hold you." Callen blinked. "This is new. We're trying," Kaylee said, "learning, admitting stuff. Feels weird, Nyria muttered. Kind of nice, though, Kaylee said. Not terrible, Nyria agreed. I appreciate that, Callen said. Sincerely, and I want you both to know I meant what I said. I'm still in. I want this. But I need to know we're building it together. I don't want to be the thing that holds your kingdoms together. I want us to be the thing that makes each other stronger. Agreed, Nyria said. We accept, Kaylee added. But next time, Callen said, maybe consult me before turning me into a plush toy. No promises, Kaylee said, but I'll think about it. So, Callen said, now what? Now, Nyria said, we plan the wedding together, on our terms. One condition, Callen said. We elope to somewhere with less bureaucracy and fewer judgmental statues. I know just the place, Kaylee grinned. No lava this time, Callen warned. Only a little, she promised, and for the first time in days they laughed together. Not as queen and consort, not as factions and figureheads, just people who were trying, which Callen thought was all anyone could really ask for. The next day was supposed to be about celebration. The palace was alive with color and sound. Banners unfurled. Musicians tuned strange glowing instruments. Even the media feeds, usually filled with speculation and criticism, were cautiously optimistic. Everyone was ready for the marriage that might unite two great houses and prevent another century of border skirmishes and passive-aggressive diplomatic banquets. Callen wore his new formal tunic. Kaylee braided his hair. Nyria pinned a crest to his chest that bore both emblems of fire and frost. It should have been perfect. It was almost perfect, until the message arrived. It came on a private frequency, a hacked transmission from a ship orbiting just outside the defense grid. It was short, direct, ugly. A voice distorted by encryption declared that the wedding would not happen, that the balance of power would not be rewritten by love or tradition, that 3 bodies would burn before the hour was up. Then it cut out. No demands, no negotiation, just a promise. Nyria froze. Kaylee swore. Callen stepped between them before panic could spiral. We are not letting fear run the story, he said. Not again, not this time. They will strike during the ceremony, Nyria said. It is symbolic, obvious, the time when we are most exposed. Then we give them a new symbol, Kaylee said. We let them strike and we strike back. We make it public, Callen said. Not with weapons, with truth, with unity. We show them what we are, not as royalty, not as factions, as us. The queens looked at each other, looked at him, then nodded, together. And so, on the day meant to celebrate love, they prepared for battle, not with swords, with honesty, with courage. With the kind of love that had nothing to do with perfect timing and everything to do with choosing someone over and over again, even when the world is watching and the shadows are closing in. If you ever find yourself standing in the middle of a floating amphitheater made of crystallized starlight, wearing a formal tunic that glows whenever you breathe too hard, surrounded by alien nobility, and 5 planetary news crews all whispering into cameras about whether or not you are going to trip during the vow exchange, please take a moment to ask yourself one very important question. Is this a wedding? Or is this an ambush disguised as a wedding? Because let me tell you, the difference is surprisingly thin. On the surface, everything looked perfect. The amphitheater floated above a mirror lake that reflected the stars and trembled slightly with each passing breeze. The seating platforms formed a circle around the altar, filled with faces from every faction, species, and scandal blog imaginable. Kaylee wore ceremonial armor, custom-tailored to somehow be both battle-ready and romantically flirty. Her red sash shimmered with her clan's flame pattern, and she smiled like she had already won something and just wanted the paperwork to catch up. Nyria, in contrast, was a storm wrapped in fabric. Her robes were silver with sharp angles and deep cuts, her crown hovering half an inch above her head as if held in place by sheer disdain for gravity. She did not smile, but the intensity of her gaze said enough. I stood between them, feeling equal parts overwhelmed, honored, and slightly itchy in the shoulders because whoever designed this tunic had clearly never considered the possibility of back sweat. The ceremony began with a chorus of multilingual singers whose harmony was so pure it made my teeth buzz. Then came the ceremonial walk, where each queen circled the platform before meeting me at the center. They each spoke vows written in their ancestral tongues, and while I could not translate all of it, I caught enough to know that Nyria's included the phrase "defend your soul" as if it were my crown, and Kaylee's included something about tickling me until I surrendered my secrets. Both felt weirdly romantic. Then it was my turn. I had written my vows alone, without aids or input, and when I spoke them, I meant every word. I promised not perfection, but presence. I promised not to fix them, but to stand beside them. I promised to be the human who remembered how to say no, even when the galaxy expected yes, and to be the man who chose them both, not because of politics, but in spite of them. The crowd went still. The efficient, a glowing, crystal-based life form that communicated through harmonic resonance, pulsed a single note of approval. The moment had come. The binding ceremony would begin. I would take their hands. We would speak the final phrase together. We would be joined. That was the plan. Until the sniper fired. There is a distinct sound that comes from energy weapons being discharged inside a ceremonial force field. It is not the usual pew or ZZ zap. It is a short, sharp bang, followed by a high-pitched ripple as the force field tries to recalibrate, and then the chaotic murmur of a crowd suddenly remembering it has legs. The sniper's first shot hit the center spire of the altar, cracking it with a flash of green light and sending fragments of ceremonial crystal into the air like glitter from a particularly violent party cannon. The second shot was aimed at Kaylee. She ducked. The third was aimed at Nyria. She did not. She stepped forward, drew a small shield from her belt, and deflected the beam into the upper rows of seating, where it struck the champagne drone, which then exploded in a glorious spray of sparkling liquid and robotic screams. By then, the crowd was in motion. Guards poured in. Dignitaries scrambled for cover. The force field collapsed and the floating platform shuddered as auxiliary thrusters kicked in to maintain altitude. Kaylee pulled a blade from her boot. Nyria summoned a gravity whip from her sleeve. Both turned to me at once. "Stay down," Kaylee said. "No," I replied. "Stay behind us," Nyria ordered. "Still no," I said. "Callen," Kaylee warned, "this is not your fight." "It is exactly my fight," I said. "Because if someone is trying to kill us right now, during the one moment we are supposed to be untouchable, then they are not just trying to end our marriage. They are trying to break what it represents, and I refuse to let that happen." I stood up, stepped to the edge of the platform, raised both arms, and shouted loud enough to trigger at least 3 audio sensors. "Everyone shut up and listen." The gunfire slowed. The panic dimmed. People turned. Cameras reoriented. I continued. "This is the moment they wanted, for us to fall apart, to splinter, to doubt. They do not fear our marriage, they fear our unity, so let us give them exactly what they fear. Let us finish what we started." Kaylee looked at Nyria. Nyria looked at me. Then they both moved forward, took my hands. Together we spoke the final phrase, not in unison but in harmony. I choose, I vow, I stay. A beam of white light surrounded us, not from the heavens, from the projector nodes hidden in the canopy, activated by the final phrase to seal the binding contract. The system had continued despite the attack, because love, apparently, had no kill switch. The sniper was caught 10 minutes later, a political extremist with ties to the Purity Alignment, a group that believed in genetic separation and marital exclusivity, so intense it made monogamy look like a rave. He was arrested. The weapon was traced. The conspiracy unraveled. But that was not the part people remembered. What they remembered was the image of three figures standing in the light, surrounded by chaos, choosing each other anyway. After the binding was completed and the attacker apprehended and the guests safely evacuated or sedated, the three of us sat in the royal solar chamber, drinking real champagne from reinforced flutes and staring out at the twin moons while trying to figure out what just happened. Technically, Kaylee said, we are now officially married. Technically, Nyria said, the ceremony was uninterrupted, the vows were spoken, the phrase was completed. Technically, I said, I may have peed a little when the altar exploded. They both laughed. It was not elegant laughter, not the kind meant for dignitaries or photo ops. It was real, raw, relief wrapped in humor. I cannot believe we actually pulled it off, Kaylee said. Neither can I, Nyria added. That makes three of us, I said. We clinked glasses. The stars outside blinked in approval. A few hours later, as the official recordings were edited and uploaded and the headlines began to spread across the network, something unexpected happened. The approval ratings did not just climb. They soared. Not because we had survived an attack, not because we had united rival houses, because we had made a choice, a human choice in full view of the galaxy, to love in spite of fear, to stay in the moment, to not let hate win. The pundits would analyze it for weeks. The analysts would write policy drafts. The social networks would meme the champagne explosion for eternity. But none of that mattered to us in that quiet room, in that quiet moment. Kaylee rested her head on my shoulder. Nyria placed her hand over mine. And for the first time since this whole mad journey began, I let myself believe that maybe, just maybe, this was more than survival. This was the start of something, not perfect, not easy, but real, and that was enough for now. Tomorrow there would be problems, threats, politics. But tonight I had two wives, a bruised shoulder, and a toast worth remembering. Not bad for a man who came here looking for spare parts.